Thank you, Dmitry, Nikolai, and Olga. When I was initially invited to be a moderator and a respondent to some of the sessions, I was a little skeptical because in some ways the question that was posed reminded me or seemed to sound like an age-old question of the art and politics relationship. And it sounded like it was, kind of a repeat or a posing of the same old question, except I think there is an advantage in a way of having people from so many different cultural contexts and so many different countries responding to the same question, because the question comes back to you with a slightly different accent, right? And in a way, it kind of renders itself unfamiliar or renders itself uncanny to you, in a way almost becoming, as it were, a new question. And listening to your presentation, it really did have this kind of sense for me of the age-old question that we've always asked: what is to be done? The Lenin question, which for the first time I found the Russian ununderstandable version of it. We've been asking this question of what is to be done, has come back to me in a slightly uncanny way. And it's interesting that it comes back to you in an uncanny way, because the word uncanny, of course, as kind of Freud reminds us, itself is rooted in the idea of the unhomely, the unheimlich becoming really that which the familiar becoming unfamiliar. Because what you're trying to do in terms of pose the question of what it may mean to imagine both a utopian possibility, but also the political kind of implications of actually building an alternative community, inheriting on the one hand from the older ideological form, which one is almost too embarrassed to acknowledge, but you're not, because you're actually taking it in terms of the possibilities that it had of the utopian minus the status monumental agenda that it had, to ask what might that be a practice for the contemporary. And that, I think, in a way, if you were to think about the idea when Sainath ended his talk on the idea of hope, hoping itself becomes the most radical political act of the contemporary. Because to be hopeful in such unhopeful times is itself, in a way, an appropriation of the possibilities of the future. So I want to begin actually with the exercise that you made all of us do, because in many ways it reminded me of a very important segment in Wittgenstein's philosophical investigations, where Wittgenstein, if he is read as a philosopher who primarily responds to the question of the dangers of a private language in terms of one's solipsism and falling entirely into one's solipsism, how do we overcome the problem of skepticism? In other words, what does it mean to know the minds of another person? Or more importantly, the example that he uses, what does it mean to be able to feel empathetically the pain of another? And the problem for him is a metaphysical one in terms of the transaction between the body and language. And the example that he gave was very similar to the exercise that you made us do. The example that he gives is really one of, he says, if someone says, I am in pain, and if one were to play a language game with him, the meaning of that phrase would be meaningless, right? I mean, how am I ever going to understand your pain? So the example that he provides is that when someone says, I'm in pain, you ask them to place their hand on one of their own hands and to close their eyes and to listen in a way to the description of what is happening. And that when you open your eyes, you find that it's not your hand you're holding, it's the hand of your friend that you're holding, right? So there is this question of what it may mean in a way to move from one's solipsism. And for me, the crucial, affective category is hope. And this question of hope becomes crucial for the simple reason that if you were to imagine this idea of the utopian as an act of radical reimagination, one of the most interesting readers of Wittgenstein is Stanley Cavell. And Stanley Cavell makes a very interesting argument where he says that there is a public face to what we may understand to be constitutional demands like the right to equality, liberty, free speech, etc. And the public face generally translates to what it may mean to demand these in the law. But there is equally a private face of what it may mean to ask of each other equality, dignity, liberty, etc. And this private face cannot wait for the perfected public community to be formed for it to actualize itself. And he describes these communities as the little communities of love. And you mentioned the word love here. Because in some ways, this question of how the movement or the transaction between the private into the public or the personal into the public is again the age-old question of what is to be done. And this transaction, to link up to some of the themes from the from the first session, is really crucial because I think in some ways what ties the two sessions together is the question of what it may mean to occupy space in a way that allows for the blurring of the distinction between the personal and the private. If there is one recurring image that comes to us from the various Occupy movements, it is the fact that there is the space of the domestic that suddenly spills over into the public. So it's not just people protesting, it's not just people, you know, kind of shouting slogans, it's also people doing very ordinary domestic things, like sleeping, eating, yawning, etc. But suddenly in a space in which there is a collectivity that they're doing this in. And these temporary autonomous zones that are created, which claim their own sovereignty, are crucial for us in the imagination of this, the ethical horizons of this potential community. Because the word autonomous itself comes very literally from the Greek for auto and nomos. If the physis was the law that one was fated to be in, it was the law given by the gods, Antigone was guilty of being autonomous because she created her auto nomos. So this nomos of the future, what it may mean to imagine, a collectivity that occupies everything and occupies everywhere, is really in some ways the idea of the private becoming personal, the body becoming personal, the individual becoming the body politic in the way that you imagine. And I was very interested in this, what it may mean to think about this as a collective here, beyond just the context that you've given us, and what other people may have to say about this. But I'll end with just one interesting story, and the story is about the sharing of rum. Sharing of rum is always an interesting starting point for the building of a political community. But this is in the heights of the creation of private property, in the first expropriation of the commons, when a lot of the people who lived on the commons were then, you know, taken on ships to the new lands as labor. There were very often moments when they were out at sea, like Ranjit described, and the waves were so strong that it was inevitable that the ship was going to sink. This was the point at which the norms that govern their relationships as, you know, owners and slaves or workers and kind of owners of production, etc., were suspended. And for a brief moment, all the rum caskets were broken in the ship. And everyone drank together because it was inevitable that they were all going to die. Right? So they would all get together and drink from this casket and get royally drunk, awaiting their encounter with God, even if he was not ready to meet them. Except every once in a while, they didn't die. And they would, you know, the storm would calm down, the waves would subside, and suddenly they found themselves now, the next morning with a really bad hangover, saying, okay, now that we've broken these caskets of rum and we've drunk together, how do we go back to the good old form? You can't, right? And these were the people who, in a way, became the first alternative communities, because they then decided not to go to Virginia to become, you know, kind of laborers on the plantation. And they found themselves being in various kinds of islands, creating, in a way, the new commons. And I think that this idea, in a way, of what it may mean, in a way, to create the political possibilities of the new body politic after having broken the casket of rum is what I took from you. So, thank you. And if we could just open it out for questions, anyone, either directly, indirectly.
Thanks for this good argument, Lawrence, of looting liquor store at the beginning of the revolution. But I wanted to ask you, in the first picture you showed of this performance, this big foot was totally prominent in the foreground. And could you maybe say something more about it? Because the whole thing with the body and the gestures at the beginning was totally wonderful with this foot, but I'm sure you have a story for that.
Well, the story is very, very kind of, I mean, we may share a mic, but for me, this picture, as we refer to as a slave who holds the skies of like enormous weight, and the skies are Russian state of 19th century, which was quite a severe heavyweight. So his feet, the feet of these slaves are, you know, something to show for the beginning. So it's the first step, the step of the slave into the picture. So that's my metaphorical interpretation, but we have more.
No, I mean, because the problem is that it was not shown at full length. It has quite clear narration because we sometimes criticize quite totality. Change mic. Troubles with mic. Now it's better. No, I meant that it was not shown in a full length, and I mentioned that sometimes we are criticized because sometimes we love to work with total narration, and they have beginning and the end, and it's clear from beginning till the end. But the background, which Olga also mentioned, was actually one of very interesting example of illegal performance with about 20 participants done in the heart of the power in kind of in a white nights, and Petersburg pretty well policed, but when you make such a big appearance, somehow they feel sometimes confused because they appeared only at the end of performance. And for us, it was also a kind of experiment in street theater. Of course, we have different way how to deal with this police if they would interrupt. But same time for us, the idea compared to many other activist performances when police should become part of it. For us, it was not the case. We actually wanted to play it from beginning till the end. Because for us, the message of the whole performance was much more important than some kind of bullshit talk with police, why it's legal or not legal. So that's the reason. But actually, I can send you a link. You can watch it through, and it's online. So we also work on the Creative Commons license, which is pretty compromised. Recently, people say, oh, it's bullshit. It's already corporate completely. But anyway, for us as an artist, it's a way a little bit to have more freedom for distribution and particular video pieces.
I'm very curious about this experiment / experience, but I have two questions. One is about the experiences of these houses of culture or palaces of culture during Soviet times. You were saying that they were hegemonic and they were always subsidized by the state. I'm wondering if they were perceived as oppressive at any point in time, and if in reproducing them you try to overcome some of those aspects, any unromantic aspects or unutopian, dystopian aspects about it. And in the present, I'm curious if there's a system or a way by which the students also contribute to how the learning is done. If there's a system for that to happen, so it's sort of really communal, and the question of what the people or who the people is.
We share the question about House of Culture. Yeah, I mean, because we can speak about a lot and speculate about emancipatory potential repressed through the course of development of Soviet history, because it's not homogeneous. It's definitely at least 5 periods when you speak about Soviet Union, which are completely different. Not completely, it has certain genealogy, but and Houses of Culture, from my point of view, it was actually the best achievements, like total literacy and so on. It was actually super important. And at the same time, you know, what was also very ambivalent, because actually the whole culture in Soviet Union was, if you go into that intellectual speculation, and particularly in the wake of Stalinian, it was very much classic-oriented. It was strong ban and suspicion on modern culture. It was even a lot of books which criticized Western modernism for the crisis of ugliness and so on. But at the same time, it was very interesting that kind of adoration and experience in classical music, classical dance, and so on, and classical painting, was actually also had a hidden emancipatory potential, which was actually absolutely exclude on modernistic experiences, but at the same time it was something which was also distributed through these houses. For good and for worse, we don't know. But then it collapsed, it's completely privatized system, and most of them it's kind of commercial centers right now with the remnants of activities like workshop for kids can be for free still there, but some of them destroyed. Yeah, not everywhere, but in Petersburg, yes. And yeah, but at the same time, it's also space of ideology and also very interesting because actually it's my favorite topic. I have heaps of pictures I can share with you, quite unique books. And actually what was very interesting, it was also became first places of dissent. For example, if the art teacher had some secret books on Western modernism, it was the place where he could secretly, in a clandestine way, to share with the student. Look, this is Cubism. It's bullshit, as people say, but there is something important there. And actually, I grew up through that system where actually in one house of culture, the teacher for art, for painting, the teacher for photography, the teacher for pottery was completely dissident. They brought amazing liberating experience, given a text which was not published and so on. And somehow maybe it happened because director just closed an eyes, and maybe it was already late beginning of 80s, which was already much more freedom, not like in Poland, but a little bit more than in 50s. So that's why it was really that ambivalence was very, very interesting thing. But in general, yeah, it was quite repressive things, and also places where it was staged official union meetings, official celebrations of Revolutionary Day. But in general, it was some kind of space where the high vote culture was really respected, which was actually very important experience for the whole population, I would say.
About the performance, how we made it. First of, yeah. Of course, how we created our collectivity during that performance, of course. Yeah, first, we decided that we have to do something in that place because that place is the most emblematic right now because you can see slaves with Russian Empire on their shoulders. We decided it collectively, but I remember that Dima brought this idea, but all of us decided that it's a good idea. Then we started to decide what can we say there. And we decided that we have to show the pressure what everybody, all of us, has on their own shoulders. And then our students created their own speech statement. They wanted to show what they have on their shoulders. And then we found this human mic because it was, just in the air. And at the same time, it makes sense because it was kind of occupation because we didn't have any permission to do performance there. And we decided it can be. And it shows the main idea because when one person really wants to say something, his voice is really weak. But when two persons speaking something, it's stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger. And then we had our body practice, and then we created this collective body, and then through this pretty not very easy creating this collective body, they created their common statement. Yeah.
Yeah, but here it was also about that singularity and that collective, but that protocols which we developed, because actually it's a work which is not signed as our piece. It's a piece which was created by our students with our help. Of course, we navigated through the year and have definitely some influence on their language. But at the same time, articulation and the way how it was constructed, it was done in quite open protocol together. Sometimes we have different protocols for the student work, but this one was pretty honest and it's attributed to the school.
Okay, I have a question concerning the School of Engaged Art as a pedagogical project. I see the need, you as artists, that you want to go with another direction of art education, and there is a need in St. Petersburg, obviously, to do that. That's one thing. And the other thing I want to ask you, Is there also a kind of debate in the public about that? I mean, is there anybody who sees, except the artist, of course, is there anybody else who sees the needs of art in the society today, especially now after your experience you have with the Manifesto 11? Because this was something happening last year and it seems to be very important. Did it change anything, or did you change already anything? Or just directly, the question is there a need for a, or is it to be debated in public, what you do, or about projects like that?
There is a, there is a certain request, I would say, from the people of young age who are trying to find themselves within this very interesting, I would say, type of society that we have at stake now. We saw that already from the beginning of the project of the school, with the first participants of the school, with number of people and with the range of people, with the diversity of people who are coming to the school of engaged art, with a certain statement that art is something that not disengaged from your political life. And in our statement was completely clear declaration about what art for us, for our collective, for our practices is, and how we combine these different matters. That actually for our society, just to explain shortly, after collapse of Soviet Union, the word political never existed in the same sentence with the word art or with the word culture, because there was no certain tradition of left-wing political culture ever since 1920s. Never existed. So either it was a dissident culture, which were political, but in a way also kind of liberal oriented, but after the collapse of Soviet Union, nobody would touch any word that belongs to rhetoric of the Soviets that grab all the rhetorics of the left, right? So it was a disgusting feeling, sense of like something that dirty, dusty, and we have to get rid of that, and we have to keep it in the past, close it down with a key, and throw the key in the ocean. So, shortly to say, just recently, it got back, the conscious, the political conscious of a being got back to our like micro communities, I would say, and it led to the rallies in 2011, 2012, not hugest ones, but the hugest since 1983, right? So it was a disruptor within the political culture and the meaning of political art, which cost us about 80 years, I would say. So right now we have to regain it. We had to regain it. And right now we see that some, like certain amount of people from activist groups and from young artists, they have this conscious reaction that they need to combine these practices, and they see that there is a perspective, and then there is a group of people who are doing that, and they want to participate. And you know, for the second year, we have these interesting people to really redevelop, always to re-question ourselves, right?
No, just I think the question was a little bit another direction. So, but Christoph, after you've been to Petersburg last year, you asked about kind of consequences. Actually, the consequences that was even on the level of Ministry of Culture, of official politics, they managed to approve, I don't know how many laws, banning and prohibiting almost everything. So the situation compared in 1 year, it's get much more criminalized. And also in the wake of Russian military intervention into Ukraine, it also created a very interesting state of people's mobilization, but not against power, but pro-power. So it's actually a very interesting debate right now. Are we still in a Germany in 1932, or maybe 33, or maybe 38? And what you can do in this situation? And of course, I strongly object this speculation because situation is very, very different from 30s. And any comparison between Putinism and Nazism is completely senseless. But there is certain roots of new way of fascism, which is not old-fashioned, it's completely new threat. And what kind of our reaction could be when, let's say, frankly, completely cut off from public sphere, completely. There is no access to media, and also that's the general proposition for Russian culture, and I think it's many cultures based on that. They're not based on consensus of criticality. Your art must be beautiful, now art must be critical, art must be very critical, and so on. Everyone loves it, you know? But there are some countries where say, no, if you don't like something, it's not about critique. You have to love your power, you have to love your state. Art should be about this. And there are many activities right now that another wake of traditionalist activism. They're actually making big rallies in support of Putin with a lot of creative invention. That's exactly where we were speculated it's actually time for social irresponsibility, where you have a certain majority of people standing pro, somehow you have to withdraw. And how politically withdraw, how to make your exodus political, I think it's a big issue. And also how to regroup, that's why I actually quoted Fraser, how you create completely counter-culture, counter-public activities. How you really build completely another type of public sphere, marginal, but at the same time with potential for regrouping. This is an issue right now. And our project is more or less testing this kind of thing. But another thing which is very good news about Russia, it's completely unstable. It can happen whatever. You know, today news, it's again escalating the war, the rubles fall down, and so on and so on. But at the same time, power is super powerful, but super fragile. But what comes after that could be much more terrible than it's now. It also...
I know there were a number of other questions, but unfortunately we've run out of time. So we could carry this forward, you know, in the tea break when we not share rum, but at least tea. Right. So thank you for the presentation. Yeah.